So, well, before we do our exploration into this very kind of mysterious term called non-meditation, which often is hard for many of us to sort of understand what is meant by this. And there are many contexts for it. So, what I thought we would do this evening is kind of explore this theme of non-meditation, both in its very ordinary context, as well as in its ultimate fruition as a Vajrayana practice. How this theme of non-meditation is discussed actually does shift from perhaps one teacher or another, but there are some very solid teachings in Tibetan Buddhism in which non-meditation is articulated very clearly as a stage on the path to awakening. Some of you maybe who have done some study or done sits in other traditions such as Zen or maybe Vipassana communities, the Theravada Vipassana insight meditation, may have heard frequently that there is nothing special about meditation, but that you just want to sit in an ordinary way, right? That there is an ordinariness to it. I always felt prickly around that word ordinary because so much of the training is to kind of come out of the ordinariness of mind into a much more spacious mind. A lot of this is language, just sort of playing with language. But here's the part that makes a difference, I think. And that is that when we are, let's say, gardening or digging or walking, just walking, when teachers like Thich Nhat Hanh or authors tell us when you're walking, only walking. Now, what happens if you're walking ordinarily? Anyone, if you're walking somewhere, what is your mind doing while you're walking? You can just jump in. The last time you walked, what was your experience of the walking? It was earlier today. Some of you know Tajay. Tajay and I were having coffee together earlier today. And yes, I was walking back to the parking lot. What was I doing? I was talking to him. I was noticing that it was cold and chilly here in Massachusetts. It's kind of clammy today, a little gray and cold. I was having a feeling about it being like that. As a California boy, I'm just, come alive when the sun comes out, but that was not the case. So that's what was happening. That is ordinary mind when I'm walking. That is not what is meant by the Zen teachers, the ones who say when you're walking, just walking. Because, what they're really talking about here in this sense of non-meditating, it's not just letting yourself be ruminating as maybe we all ordinarily do, but it's intentionally bringing a sense of no thought into the action. It's intentionally not having to do, to project, to react. But the just walking comes with that diffuse awareness that we practiced with the open eye meditation. The digging, just digging, if we're doing gardening. The just digging isn't just digging with ruminating and getting spun off into the thoughts. It's being aware of simply that imminent present moment experience of digging. What does it feel like? If I'm digging with my claw, I love putting my hands in the dirt. I used to have a vegetable garden in Santa Barbara. And of course, I used a shovel to dig the beds, but I love just getting my hands in that organic soil and just feeling the soil. That was a sensory experience that was very immediate. It was in the moment. And there were still thoughts happening, but those were not hijacking the experience. The digging was, yes, it was reveling in feeling the soil, but it was a direct present moment experience, and it was done with a sense of fullness. I think, Leah, maybe you mentioned that. You used the word fullness. Somebody mentioned fullness. And so it's not just focusing on the digging, but that diffuse awareness is also incorporating the environment around me with great equanimity, without commenting on the weather, the temperature, and all of that. But it really is a fullness of that experience of simply digging. This is what is meant by considering the ordinariness of it. In other words, not making it complicated, but just being in that moment directly with the experience at hand, without filters, editing, commentaries, just as it is. How ordinary is that? I don't know. I consider it, when we can do this without the striving or the trying, it's pretty extraordinary. So, this is what in Zen often is referred to as suchness or thusness, which is when we are able to simply pay attention to reality just as it is, without the filters, the projections, the stories, but really abiding fully in the present, seeing it just as it is, with that quality of ultimate simplicity. That's what is often referred to as thusness or suchness. Sometimes you'll see that in some of the Tibetan teachings as well. And for some of you, as you've been sharing your experiences, I think part of it is what you're communicating is a sense of wholeness, of fullness, that is so deeply natural to who we are. We're not making this state out of anything. It's already there. It's already a capacity. It is also clear, profoundly clear, uncontrived. It is, in fact, probably the most uncontrived, unmanifested part of who we are. Open awareness, mindful openness, where there is no confusion, there is no obfuscation. And yes, it is fully spontaneous. It is just there. Everything else in our lives gets in the way. But anyway, this is what is meant by suchness. It's not that different from the Vajrayana, the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. Now, in that tradition, we have a very systematic process of training the mind that we call Mahamudra, which is a tantric Tibetan Buddhist practice developed by Tilopa, the great Mahasiddha, or the great teacher, the master in the 10th, 11th century. His Indian name was Talika. He lived along the Ganges in India, and contributed immensely to the Vajrayana tradition that then also continued to flourish after that. So he's the one who largely systematized these 4 areas of cultivation that we call Mahamudra, or great gesture. Mahamudra, great gesture. And the point to this is to show a systematic way to go from calming the mind, just like we did. Shamatha is the first of the 4. Calm abiding, peaceful abiding through just gently sustaining attention on the object of your awareness, like breath, body, maybe an image. There are 9 stages to shamatha that are often practiced, where you may visualize here in the center of the forehead a pebble. It begins with a pebble, moving to other objects. A small Buddha. You can meditate on a small Buddha in the center of the forehead. Ultimately, a shining dot. This is seen to be an energy center in the center of the forehead in the classical Indian system of subtle physiology. And that leads into, once the mind is settled, once it is pliable, right? It's workable, because it's no longer just spinning into reaction or anxious and trying to project itself onto the world. The mind naturally settles on its own. It just opens and settles. So some of you I know have had this experience many, many times. Some maybe haven't, but that's what the meaning of calm abiding is. Just by placing attention, feeling the breath, in the way that Thich Nhat Hanh in the reading earlier talked about body, mind, breath, sort of mutually enhancing here. Then we move into vipassana, or simplicity. Actually, vipassana literally means insight. Yeah, and it's the same as vipassana in the Pali language, where we start to see, oh, this thought that's arising, it just sort of manifests, and then it disapparates, or it disappears, and now another one comes. So who am I if I'm not my thoughts that keep coalescing and dispersing? Well, I'm the one who's simply bearing witness to those experiences. We start having insights, in other words, into the nature of this mind that is just constantly creating, fabricating, dissolving. And yet, who is the one who is bearing witness? So here, this is what is meant by insight, seeing into the nature of what the mind is doing, as well as getting a sense of that aspect of mind that is this continuity of awareness that just, as the Buddha says in his mindfulness teaching, allow yourself to rest in a continuity of mindfulness. Continuum, that's the word that's used. I think Bhikkhu Analayo uses the continuum of mindfulness. That just comes, this is the teaching, but it's not so easy to do, right? Because there's constantly triggers and things coming up for us. But that is what vipassana is helping us to see with clarity. And it's effortlessly abiding in that place so that we can maintain some clarity in the midst of it. And then once that becomes a state that we're able to abide in, we may begin to have that experience of the source of awareness that is sort of ever present. And in this sense that it is a non-dual experience of awareness and is in great equanimity, that we are resting without preference. It's just open awareness, just as it is, just as this moment is, without facilitating anything. Yeah? This sense of suchness is another way to say it. What we call one taste, non-dual awareness. Basically, awareness is simply self-evident in that moment, and being aware of awareness itself. And so here the duality is gone. Here there's no conceptualizing or reifying our experiences. And then the fourth state. So we've got shamatha, simplicity, one taste, and then finally non-meditation. So you may ask, okay, Chris, why did we start with the end? Can't we just do shamatha? Of course. Now, this is not a linear process, first of all. Yeah. Once I've got shamatha down, then I can do vipassana. Once I've got vipassana, then I can do one taste. Although the teachings are laid out in a linear way, the actual experience is that we are constantly working with all of these states as our practice deepens. So non-meditation has different levels too in the Tibetan tradition. There is kind of an introductory level, if you will, which is where there is still a mind projecting. Yeah, there is still stuff coming and going, emotions, things are still happening. And yet, we're not seeking to do anything about those things. We're just sort of aware. We're still sort of in that state of one taste as the mind is doing its projecting and commenting, only we're not taking the bait. We're not getting drawn into the narratives. We're just simply bearing witness. And then in sort of the mid-stage of non-meditation. So in other words, that first stage, we're not trying to facilitate anything. We're not trying to meditate our way out of these thoughts, out of these experiences. It's like a full allowing of things as they are. The mid-level of non-meditation then is such in which these thoughts, yes, there is still a self being experienced in some way, And yet we're bringing the clarity of that vipassana and of one taste into the experience of self so that we're able to really see the relative nature of self. We're on the way to cultivating a deeper opening in what Buddhists would call the ultimate nature, the ultimate reality, just before Buddhahood. And that is then the end level of non-meditation, is where that continuum of awareness is simply there. We finish meditating, we get up, we go into the world, and we're not losing anything in the process. That this continuity of awareness is maintained here. The spontaneity of that awareness, if we choose to act, to respond, to say something to someone who talks to us, it's coming from that place. It's coming from that source, that continuum of awareness. This is what is meant by the ultimate stage of non-meditation, where the fruits of our practice are now imprinted. And for any of you who've done retreat, you may have had the experience where you go on retreat, you get into that zone, it feels amazing, right? You're really feeling free, a sense of freedom. And then there's that transitional time back into your life, and then maybe it lingers for a few days, and then you're right back into where you were before going on the retreat. How many people have had that experience? Certainly I have, yeah. And so part of it is not to get disheartened with it, yeah? Because this is what happens when we're not in a monastic environment. Many of us are living active lives out there. We have, in some ways, a greater challenge because of that, as opposed to being in a monastic environment full time and just being able to cultivate, to practice, to recite texts, to chant, and all of these things. So, we're given a task here that is not easy. And so, but we still want to remember that the path that we're on here is inclusive of all of it. This is why practicing daily is kind of like an infusion, a daily infusion that keeps those imprints from retreat. It keeps the imprints from our experiences that we've had that were really wholesome. It keeps them available, if you will. And it reminds us, oh, well, I don't have to make this happen. I just have to sort of relinquish everything else so that this can arise again. Because this is really the way it is. We're not having to reconstruct our minds to get back to that state. We're just having to let go of everything else that is being sort of put into us, and that we are then putting back out into the world. So really there are two things here. The last thing I'll say is that this non-meditation does imply action in the world. It does imply the action of the bodhisattva, if you will, on some level. It's saying, yes, spontaneous responding with a heart that is loving and has skillful means and also has stability and equanimity. But it also implies a view. It's not just action. It implies a view. It implies kind of that we always have at hand this sense of clarity to see things as they are, never to be too far away from it. Maybe that's more realistic for a lot of us than expecting this source of awakening to be fully open all the time when we're living busy lives. But just to know it's not that far away. Yeah, there are moments where we can encounter it. There are moments where we can't because we're too engaged. That's fine. You know it's there. You've had the experience. You'll get back to it when things quiet down and you make a space simply to relinquish everything else. And one of the things that this book actually is a really helpful book here. It's called Mahamudra, A Practical Guide by Zurmang Garwang Rinpoche, who is one of my students at Harvard. I've told some of you the story of Zurmang of Rinpoche. I didn't know who he was. He was a very humble guy dressed in khakis and a windbreaker. We would meet in Harvard Yard, and I was teaching him mindfulness. Are you kidding me? This guy's a lineage holder. In fact, he is a reincarnation of Tilopa, apparently, who I mentioned about Mahamudra. He's an amazing, amazing teacher. And he wrote this book called Mahamudra Practical Guide, where he goes through the text. He makes the point in this book that part of the view involves never forgetting that we're part of what is called the Dharma Dhatu in Buddhism, or the Buddha field. That we are part of this unbelievable, miraculous display of the Buddha field, of the energy that is profoundly creative. It is emptiness itself. Thank you, Heinz, for putting the book title in the chat. Yeah, if anyone's interested. It's published through Wisdom Books. And so that's part of it too, is seeing the miraculous, seeing the Dharma Dhatu, or the Buddha field, and not taking the bait of everything playing out in the world as if that is the only reality. But just as we can experience awareness underlying our thoughts, we also want to hold to that view of the Buddha field, the Dharma Dhatu. If you want to call it the energy of the divine, that's fine too. Sort of behind the scenes, if you will, of what is transpiring, even in the midst of a world on fire. Yeah. That's how we can hold to the path, retain some faith, some confidence in the practice and in the path and in the teachings. So that is also part of non-meditation. My teacher Leslie, who's an artist, used to paint. She made these amazing paintings while she was in a state of samadhi. And man, they are transmissions. When you see them in person. I was in Santa Fe in 2017, the last time I saw her in person, and she showed me this room full of her paintings. They were amazing, just vibrating with energy. So that too is non-meditation, is allowing yourself to create. As a songwriter, as a musician, for me, I'll practice sometimes on retreats. I will just then move into the studio or pick up my guitar, and I'll just start creating spontaneously. That is a good way to train with this quality of non-meditation, doing creative things within that space of your practice.